We're pleased to welcome Hazel today. And Hazel, it's nice to see your face. It's been a while. Hazel has been a frequent presenter at our programs, and we always find her work and her passion for it inspirational. Hazel is a supervising attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland and has devoted a full decade plus of her life fighting for tenants' rights. Her passion for this advocacy was born out of her personal experience as she watched her own parents make difficult choices as they worked to settle in this country and secure citizenship after immigrating from Nicaragua. She was selected as one of the first class of Innovation Mission Fellows by the Sisters of Charity Foundation of Cleveland, and there she was able to fully unleash her passion to ensure representation for all in housing court in Cleveland. She arrived in Cleveland from Miami in 2008 and calls herself a converted Clevelander, and none could be happier about that fact than all of us Clevelanders. She was recognized as a Cleveland champion by the Plain Dealer in 2019, and she is working harder than ever in these times to help those who have been affected by COVID maintain stable housing. And with that, thank you for joining us, Hazel, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey everyone, thank you Marianne and Rachel. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm gonna have you write my bio next time, Marianne. Or maybe you can share that with me. I really appreciate seeing so many friendly faces and familiar faces on this call today. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I did put a couple of slides together, so bear with me for a second. Can everybody see that? Okay. So we're going to talk about right to counsel and what that means in the city of Cleveland. Some of you might be familiar with this already, but just to give a little background and an update on sort of where we are with right to counsel, but really what housing looks like in the city post COVID. So as some of you might know, Cleveland passed a right to counsel ordinance. So it's the fourth city in the country to pass a legislation that affords tenants the right to legal representation in eviction court. It's a codified ordinance, so it's a passed law. It passed in October of 2019, and it actually becomes effective just next week, July 1st, 2020. It does have some eligibility parameters. So tenants have to have at least one child in the household, be at 100% of the federal poverty guidelines, and live in the city of Cleveland. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the federal poverty guidelines, that's about, for a family of four, about $26,000 a year of annual income. And what the right actually is the tenant is entitled, when they're facing an eviction, to have an attorney represent them in eviction court. You know, many are familiar with Miranda rights because we learn about it through TV. You know, you have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, one will be appointed to you. But prior to this legislation, that actually wasn't true for civil cases, and an eviction is a civil case. So this legislation, that's what it does. It entitles tenants to have an attorney represent them when they're facing an eviction, which is really depriving them of a basic human need, their housing. In addition to that, the legislation sets up a partnership with a lead partner organization, which in our instance is United Way of Greater Cleveland. And what United Way will be doing is they're really doing a lot of the outreach, a lot of the marketing, and we're going to see some of the materials that have been developed with United Way through this partnership as part of this presentation. And tenants, in addition, may be eligible for emergency rental assistance, which is, I'm going to talk about that in a minute too, but really it's really needed right now post-COVID. It was a need in our community prior. It's definitely a higher need now. So we're in really the deep implementation phases right now. We're ready to launch next week. Many of our plans had to be changed at Legal Aid and with United Way because of COVID. We really anticipated that this was going to look different. We didn't expect that we would be training new attorneys remotely, that we would be, dealing with the housing court remotely. So really, we've had to very, very quickly adapt and adjust our implementation to the current need. So where we're at with the implementation, we have a website. It's going to be launching hopefully next week, freeevictionhelp.org. What I'm sharing right here is a picture of posters that are going to be at housing court to really heavily try to do outreach for tenants who are showing up there because they think that's where their hearing is. It informs tenants to access us via a variety of different ways. They can reach us via phone. So Legal Aid is not doing in-person intake right now, but they can reach us via phone. They can reach us on the website, and they can also reach us through 211. 211 is going to be a portal, a partner referral agency. So they'll be able to log in and actually make the referral directly to Legal Aid. And we've trained them to do the screening process. In addition to this, there's going to be some information on the Housing Court's website informing tenants of the right that they're entitled to. And then we're also doing an outreach. So tenants will be, when they get served with eviction papers, there's going to be an insert that notifies tenants that they might be eligible for representation. Now, not every tenant is going to be eligible, and so we anticipate that we're going to get a lot of calls of folks who aren't eligible, but you know, we'll try to serve those people as well. And in addition to the insert that's going with the summons, tenants are going to get a letter that's going to be mailed to them individually, addressed to them, and that's going to tell them, you know, that we expect that they're going to be served with an eviction notice and that they should contact Legal Aid right away. And then also we're working with NEOC and the Democratic Socialists of America to do door-to-door knocking, so that, you know, trying to do as much outreach as we can so tenants know that they might have the right to representation. And then we'll be doing ads with City Council and the CDCs as well. In the fall, we anticipate through a grant with the Ohio State Bar Association, or Foundation rather, sorry, that we'll be doing potentially ads, bus wraps, things like that to, again, notify tenants that they might be eligible. So really the implementation is focusing on getting the word out, letting people know that they have this right, and that hoping that people will reach out as early as possible in the process, because the earlier that we get the cases, the more prepared we can be for court. And then I mentioned there's a website, freeevictionhelp.org. This is just a screenshot. It's not live just yet, but the tenants will be able to go onto the website and actually apply for services through the website as well. So we're in the process of developing this right now with United Way. And then I mentioned rent assistance. So right now there's really a need for rent assistance because so many people have lost their jobs, you know, are facing illness, or whatever industry they work in hasn't fully opened, or unemployment benefits haven't kicked in. So we have a couple of partnerships, Eden, CHN Housing Partners, Catholic Charities, NEOC, and the City of Cleveland. All of these agencies are administering some sort of rent assistance, and we're a direct referral agency for all of them. And so as part of the implementation, we're also going to be doing an evaluation. So the legislation requires yearly reports back to the city, and that's going to be under United Way's responsibility, but they've conducted an RFP process to select an evaluator, and we had a pretty extensive interview process and had a lot of people in the community participate in this. And our evaluator that's been selected is Stout, Racius, and Ross. They are actually a investment banking evaluation type firm. And they have worked with a lot of jurisdictions on right to counsel, and very specifically really trying to prove the return on investment. So if, you know, if it costs X, Y, and Z dollars to provide the representation, we really anticipate, just based on what other jurisdictions are seeing, that there's a cost savings to other systems, you know, so shelter systems, food stamps, every system that is impacted when somebody isn't stably housed. We expect that there will be a return on investment in that area. And so one of the key pieces of the evaluation will be looking at that return on investment. And then sort of what does Right to Counsel Cleveland look like post-COVID? So the Cleveland Housing Court actually stopped hearing cases and stopped accepting filings mid-March. So for those of you who aren't familiar, on a yearly basis, Cleveland Housing Court hears about 9,000 eviction cases. And those are all specific, there's one judge and a bunch of magistrates who hear the cases. They've stopped accepting filings in mid-March. They just reopened last week and they made some changes to their rules. So they would only accept 125 cases a day. That was the max of filings. They have a backlog of about 1,000 cases. And, unlike some other jurisdictions, because we didn't accept filings from March until just last week, we really have no idea when the court was opening, how many cases were going to be in queue. We knew the backlog, but we didn't know what was coming. And I only have a few more slides. I know I'm like getting close to my 15 minutes. And so we know that the court opened last week, and on the first 2 days that they were open, they were pretty much maxed out on the number of filings. So they reached that 125 case on the first 2 days. The last 3 days of the week, the filings went down. The hearings are being conducted via Zoom. So as you can imagine, that's definitely a barrier for some tenants who don't have access to internet, or they don't have the technology to jump on a Zoom call. It's pretty complicated for attorneys to try to present their case via Zoom. It's really hard for tenants to try to navigate that on their own. And then there is going to be rent assistance that's available. So the payments are generally made directly to the landlord. The landlord has to be willing to accept the rent. And so we're asking folks that if people need the assistance, to contact legal aid, call 211, or some of the other agencies that I just talked about. In addition to that, the city of Cleveland is putting together a rent assistance program, and that's through the CARES Act. So there's going to be additional funding available come July. And so just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of who is calling legal aid today. So we were pretty consistent with last year until about last week, where we had an increase of about 25%. Callers are really asking for rent assistance, eviction filings, and it's not just for Cleveland, it's the suburbs and really the other counties that we serve as well. Some of the trends that we're seeing is, is the housing covered by the CARES Act? And landlords sort of reaching out and trying to figure out, is there rent assistance for my tenant? And so what we anticipate, even though the filings late last week didn't max out, we really do anticipate that there will be an avalanche of evictions. This is because unemployment is going to run out. The economy isn't really 100% back. Landlords haven't been able to file their evictions for 3 months, so that means that they might have trying to wait and see if the tenant is going to catch up, and when the tenant doesn't, they're going to begin to file. And rent assistance is really just becoming available, and getting the word out is going to be a challenge, but really what needs to happen right now is getting the word out to tenants and landlords that this funding is available. And we really anticipate, we did a lot of work on trying to project how many tenants would be eligible for right to counsel. I mean, I can't even tell you the number of hours that were spent trying to estimate those numbers, and all of that is really not relevant right now. We really anticipate that so many more tenants are going to be entitled to a lawyer through the ordinance, and that we will have to provide that service. So that is, I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. Hazel, thank you so much for sharing information on such a needed resource in the community. We have had a couple questions come in. You mentioned the digital divide, and so many people maybe not having the knowledge of Zoom or access to Zoom for these hearings. How are you working to deal with that divide to help them deal with the eviction filings?
Yeah, so what the court has reported is that for tenants are getting notification in the summons that their hearing is virtual. And then a couple of days before the hearing, assuming that the tenant has an email or some way to reach them, they're getting the link to the Zoom hearing. What's happened is that tenants who don't actually have access are just showing up in court. And so those tenants are being rerouted to a overflow room where the court is going to be setting up technology so that they can access the hearing while in the Justice Center, but not in the same room as the magistrate or the other party potentially. For the cases that legal aid is going to be handling, the cases that we're going to handle through right to counsel, that's going to be at the forefront of, you know, does the tenant have technology? And if the tenant doesn't, we're going to make sure that we, you know, set them up either in our conference rooms or we get together with them. We will make sure that they have access. That's why it's so critical that people reach out to us as early on in the process so that we can analyze the case, but also make sure that we're ready to go when their hearing is scheduled.
And a question here, prior to COVID, how many households were anticipated to benefit from right to counsel?
So our projections were prior to COVID, about 3,000 households would fall under the 100% of the federal poverty guidelines and have one child in the household. And that was based on data. You know, we did a pretty extensive research project with Case Western. And that was part of that data. You know, right now we really have no idea. The calls we've been getting are from households that traditionally would have never qualified for legal aid, but now are facing, you know, housing insecurity as a result of COVID. So really, we have no idea how many people will actually be eligible now.
And obviously, this is focused on City of Cleveland, but have there been discussions or thoughts around expanding beyond the city to the suburbs, other parts of the region and state?
I mean, in my dream would be that the entire state, that it would be statewide. But we have had conversations with the county, you know, and trying to maybe test this model in other areas. But really the immediate goal right now is to try to get it off the ground. You know, Cleveland's model is a little different than the rest of the country because of our partnership with United Way and sort of the funding structure. And because of that, really there's a lot of attention across the country on the success of this program, and getting it off the ground is critical.
So when an eviction determination is made, what recourse does a tenant have, and where do they go, especially now at a time when shelters are cutting back so much?
Yeah, so, you know, usually in the city of Cleveland, if a tenant gets evicted, there's no requirement that the landlord put their stuff in storage. So what happens is the bailiffs come out and all of their stuff is placed on the tree lawn for the taking, pretty much. After an eviction has been granted, so meaning that the tenant lost the eviction for some reason, or maybe the tenant just failed to show up, because there's a lot of tenants who don't show up, that tenant usually gets about 7 to 10 days to move. We know that post-COVID, that's been extended to about 15 days. But really what an attorney can do in these situations, an attorney can change that dramatically. An attorney can stabilize the household. They can enter into an agreement where, you know, they have a lot more time to move if for some reason they can't salvage the relationship. You know, a tenant would benefit so much from an attorney representing them, because it really makes either an easier transition to other housing, or it's a way for us to be able to either, you know, we litigate the case and we win, or we settle the case in some other manner that really stabilizes the household.
And in speaking of the attorneys that will be involved in this process, how are they recruited, trained, compensated for this work?
So the attorneys, we actually have some of them on this call, which I'm so excited about. We've hired a bunch of new attorneys at Legal Aid. So they are staff attorneys that are working at Legal Aid. You know, we know that we have an expertise in the area, and that we can, you know, we have a long-standing sort of expertise in this area of law. So we've been training up our attorneys virtually, so a lot of Zoom fatigue, but what we've been doing that over the course, they started all June 1st. So we have a bunch of attorneys that are in staff, and then some attorneys are going to be contract attorneys too, sort of, and we'll be providing training for them as well. We have developed a pretty extensive training materials and videos and manuals, all kinds of materials to make sure that they are trained and ready to go when the legislation takes effect. And so in addition to the staff attorneys, we're going to have volunteer lawyers who, Legal Aid has a long history of partnering with volunteer attorneys. And so we have some of those. And then we'll also have contract attorneys who will be paid for the work that they do in their cases. So it's a mix, trying to really meet the need and trying to make sure that we have enough for the flow that's coming.
And speaking of the avalanche that's coming, the flood that's coming, when we think about responding to those one by one, looking ahead more to kind of the systemic issues that cause many of these issues here, is what are some of those larger systemic changes that we need to make in order to address this crisis?
When it comes to housing, every single area is impacted by it. So, we need more affordable housing in the city. We need more programs that support low income folks, whether it's a local voucher program that is, that or a subsidy of some sort that isn't administered by the federal government, or, so we need to be able to address housing. We need to be able to address, wages. We need to be able to address racism. This is all interconnected. All of those issues need to be addressed in order for us to really move the needle forward. Right to counsel is just one small piece of that puzzle, one area where we can provide dignity in that process. But there are so many other larger issues that we need to address as a community.
And you mentioned the process of getting the word out to the community about these resources. What are some ways that we might be able to help, or some needs that you have in order to help get that word out?
Our biggest need right now is making sure that tenants reach us as early as possible. The hardest case is the one where the tenant shows up in court and says, oh, wait, I might be entitled to a lawyer. I want to see if I'm entitled to one. So can you give me a continuance? That's really, really hard for the tenant, for the court, and for us, because that are providing the service. So our biggest need is that the word is out, that people are being referred to us as early as possible, so that we can analyze the case and really do what we do best, which is represent tenants and work up their case. I really think it's important that tenants understand that this is available to them, but also not everyone is going to be eligible. So for the ones that aren't, we can still provide a level of assistance to them. So our biggest need is getting that word out, making sure that tenants know, and making sure that they have access to the court while the process is pending.
So this project has been a passion of yours for quite some time now, beginning with the Innovation Mission. Can you speak to your experience with the Innovation Mission and bringing this project to life?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting because I never really contemplated that innovation could be applied to some sort of social project or change, or social justice. But it's one thing that I keep thinking about that was like embedded in the work that we did was sort of iteration, and how you have to be willing to iterate over and over and over as part of innovation. And I think that has been true, especially with COVID. We have had to iterate every step of the way, even when we thought we had it figured out. And to be able to adapt and change, I think it really provided a structure where the thought process is different because of innovation, but really sort of that resiliency to be able to say, okay, well, we were going in this direction, but now we have to go in this other direction. And that continues to be the case. So I think it really provided that groundwork for us to do that. But one of the, in terms of my experience, really it elevated the conversation in a way that maybe wouldn't have been elevated otherwise. And I think that was one of the more critical things about the Innovation Mission, is that people were talking about it, and we were able to raise community awareness in a way that really, and it was really fast. Whereas a project like this could take years and years. I mean, it did take years, but it could have been way longer. It could have been 5-10 years before we were at this point. So it really sort of elevated the conversation.
We have time for one final question. You are a great model of pursuing your passion and realizing a dream. what advice would you give to others to help summon the confidence to realize their own passion?
One of the things that I remember, actually, Maria Smith is on this call, and I always say this story to her, so one day when we were thinking about applying for the innovation mission, the application required that you were a seasoned professional. And I remember telling Maria, I'm like, I don't think I'm seasoned enough. And she's like, oh, you've been baking all your life. And so I really, sort of think that don't doubt, people shouldn't doubt themselves. Like, even if you think you're not ready for it, you probably are. I also think to surround yourself with people that are there to support you and cheer you on. And really, I mean, the entire team at Legal Aid got behind this. And that was critical. So while I end up getting a lot of the credit, it really isn't me. Like, it's all the folks that worked on it over the past of the course of the last couple of years. So I think surrounding yourself with the right people that are willing to just buckle down and work with you is critical, but really not to doubt yourself would be my advice.
Well, Hazel, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights today. Your work has introduced an opportunity that will make a great impact for people in our community. So we thank you for all you have done. And for those on the call, we will be sharing Hazel's presentation and also resources to follow up. So we encourage you to continue to learn more and spread the word across the community. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Marianne.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And Hazel, thank you for all that you are doing. I can't imagine what it must feel like to wake up every single day and know that you are making the difference in the lives of hundreds of people and making sure that they have shelter. So keep baking, keep following that passion, because we look forward to seeing great things from you to benefit Cleveland going forward. Thank you.